So thank you for that. Yeah. So we're here today to talk about the Highway 3 area, which some of you, if you live in that area, you likely received a direct letter, and if you didn't, we're glad that you got it as well, because we have done our best to advertise this session and get this out there. Just as I guess a little bit of background, this session today is part of or in support of the ongoing village plan review. So that Chester Village is governed by a secondary planning strategy, and we're currently doing a review of that. And that comes with the land use bylaw as well, so all the regulations for how what's developed where and what processes that they have to go through. We did the same thing on the municipal side, so everything outside of Chester Village that concluded in January of 2020, and then the next item of business was to do the village. So we're on to that now. We've had last summer there was a resident survey. If you received that, that was also in support of this. So a package went out to every property in the village and had quite a lengthy list of questions. We got really good response to that. So that was an excellent piece of information and feedback for us. We also this year have contracted FBM, Fowler, Ballard, Mitchell architects, and they have been doing a study on not the Highway 3 area, but sort of what I call the core of the village, the other part of the village. That study has been mostly focused on sort of architectural controls and character, they call it. And so that is concluded, and we'll hopefully have that presented to council in September. And so what felt like it was left was the Highway 3 or North Street area, which wasn't covered by FBM study, and rightly or wrongly, and hopefully we'll have some of those discussions tonight. I think sometimes is viewed as different from the core of the village, and other times is thought as sometimes the goal is to keep them separate and they're unique and they have benefits to that. And other times it's to sort of merge the rules together. So we're here to talk about all of that. We are running another session again this evening. It will be the same, just in case anybody saw that. But again, if you want to direct anyone to come this evening, that would be fantastic. Washrooms, real quickly, men's on this side and women's there. As John goes through here, we do have a few spots where we'll kind of pause to try to have some discussion points around what we just covered. If those discussions feel like they're going a little long, we may just kind of keep moving and then we can revisit it at the end. We do want to leave lots of time at the end for discussion. So I think the presentation is probably 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have as long as needed for discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Good, thanks, Gareth. So yeah, my name is John Gamey, and I've been working here with the municipality of Chester this summer as the summer planning student. And so today we're going to be talking pretty much like what Gareth said about Highway 3 development. So our agenda for today is start talking about a little background, so just kind of past planning initiative for the past 10 years around Highway 3 and things of that nature. We'll talk about the old vision for Highway 3 that maybe you can get some ideas about what a new vision would look like going forward. After that, we'll get a little bit more into the details. So we'll talk about both residential and commercial development along Highway 3. And then finally, we'll wrap up with going over one of our rezoning scenarios. This is just a scenario. I want to emphasize that. So we're just trying to be creative, try to get some feedback from you folks, tell us what you like, don't like about it, and that way it can really help to kind of inform how we go through the overall plan review. So just to get started, to make sure we're all on the same page about what area we're talking about today. So on this map here, what colored in is what's known as the Highway 3 development area. So the different colors all represent different zones within the development area, which we won't worry about too much right now. It's more just thinking about the black outlined area, which makes up the larger area. So just so we know what we're talking about here today. So for a bit of background as to how we got here today. So back in 2011, the municipality hired a company called Statistics Planning and Design to do what was called the Highway 3 Streetscape Study. And in this study, they did a lot of engagement with the public, which maybe some of you folks were involved in, I'm not sure. And what came from this engagement was a vision for the Highway 3 area. And along with that vision supported were a bunch of architectural guidelines and design guidelines to apply to this area. So those guidelines and were all implemented in 2012 by this municipality, and they're still in the land use bylaw today, and that's kind of what governs how development takes place out there. So then if we fast forward about 7-8 years, we kind of get to 2019, 2020, and that's when this village plan review really kicked off. So kind of like what Garth was mentioning, This kind of took place with some general public engagement at first. Then we looked at things like the resident survey, which was done last summer, and then finally FBM study, which was looking at the inner architectural areas, so kind of like the core of the village, which is not exactly what we're talking about today, but again, it's all part of that larger village plan review. And that brings us, of course, to where we're at today. So we're talking about Highway 3, which is its own little area, which needs kind of its own planning and different kind of considerations to think about. So let's go back to 2011 now, when the Kistics did their first engagement and developed this vision for North Street. So through their engagement with the residents here in Chester, they found that a lot of people wanted Highway 3 to be thought of as North Street against this idea of North Street. And what that meant was people wanted to see it thought of as a special place. And a good quote there is as a destination rather than a conduit. So not necessarily just a kind of a roadway you drive through and pass the village, making it its own kind of special place. And then finally, a lot of people also wanted to see it seem like an extension of the actual village core. So I thought I'd ask early on, just get discussion going. Does anybody think, who's been here for the past 10 years, has this vision actually been achieved in any way, in your opinion? Could be yes, could be no, and let me know why or why not. If anyone has any thought?
No development.
Right, yeah.
So none of it has changed.
Nothing's changed.
Well, the health, and they sort of, they did the landscape.
Right, yeah.
and setback.
Right, yeah. But you think
But that doesn't change how that route street is used.
So it doesn't feel like a destination in any way, or
It's not yet.
not yet,
Wasn't it in the, I know, we moved here, we bought about 10 years ago,
right?
and I remember reading the plan before we came. And was the road not supposed to be divided with island of trees and all this sort of.
Just a little bit about that.
Yeah, the streetscape plan did also include some physical infrastructure changes, smoothing out the corner of Victoria Street and the roundabout proposal for Duke. Some of those over the years between 2011 and now have come to council as, I guess, individual items to consider, and due to, I think it's fair to say, due to cost and then also complications, because the streets are owned by the province, the Department of Transportation. So my understanding is, for example, the roundabout was something that the province was just not willing to consider. So we ran into those issues where the consultant had suggested these would help slow traffic down, and the province said Trunk 3 or Highway 3 is a thoroughfare, and so they literally viewed it the opposite way to what the visioning had kind of just gone through. So I basically would say that most of those significant infrastructure changes have been determined are not going to proceed. And what we're left with is sort of the zoning and the regulatory framework that was created at that time. Yes.
If that's the case, the province wasn't prepared to support it. It's seems like it would have been a far higher priority than putting in a roundabout at Marriott's home.
Yeah, and I know there were comments about that. I can't really speak to the specifics of why.
So has that changed at all? So has the province still consider Highway 3 to be, as it was then, a thoroughfare? Is it still that?
That's my understanding, and I'm not sure. I don't know, Chad, if you remember those discussions, I think that was maybe around 2015 or 16 that the roundabout was brought to council. So it may be worth checking in again. We certainly haven't been made aware that anything's changed.
And the reason I asked, of course, is that that hasn't changed, then how that will still impact what you can do. Or anything can be done.
And you'll see here as we go through it, we're not looking at those sort of, other than potentially, sidewalk expansion to sort of fill in the gaps. We're not, because that is something, sidewalks are something that the municipality does build or pay for. We're not looking at those larger physical changes. It's more about where zoning happens and where different uses can be developed.
Is there any chance of you being able to afford a sidewalk or something down on North Street?
Is there any chance? I think, yes,
There's
definitely a chance. But more recently, some of the discussions, so the original Highway 3 plan called for sidewalks basically throughout the area. Some of the, along Highway 3 out by the food land, what's happened more recently is council's partnered, and rather than do a sidewalk, do the paved shoulder, which is not as good, but it is better than nothing, I guess you could say. So I think it's still reasonable in this kind of an exercise to hear or to make the comment that sidewalks should be expanded in that area. We'll certainly take that back to council. I can't promise that it will happen, but I think it would be over, again, and we're we're talking about long, these kind of planning decisions are meant to be over the, the next 10 to 20 years.
So that's one thing that council could do without provincial approval, you could build
To
a concrete sidewalk
Yes.
up and down Wall Street.
Yes.
And lower the speed limit.
That's something unfortunately we can't do, because again, that's the province as the road authority, as, and, you know.
Certain, yeah.
Isn't there capacity to lobby the province? I mean, if this is what the residents want, and if. You know, and if the municipality wants this and they're being the roadblock, couldn't it be lobby or
we can-
apply pressure? I mean, we are all residents of Nova Scotia, and if this is what we want to do with our community.
We definitely can, not to be pessimistic about it, but I'm not sure about, things like speed limits have been tried across the province and
Right.
wholeheartedly unsuccessful, other than HRM, which is under different provincial legislation and has a bit more, but yes, absolutely, we can definitely do that. I just,
Well, and much has changed. I mean, once upon a time that was the highway, but now we have the 103 and the 103 is expanding, so that would take more traffic. So therefore, maybe, there's the opportunity to apply pressure for rules to change on the old.
yeah,
ones.
I'm not a traffic engineer, but my understanding is that number 3 still holds its classification as a truck
Right.
thoroughfare, and I don't think
Right.
that the 20 of the 103 changes that, so
Right.
it's sometimes you're running into engineering standards, which are
Yeah.
not very flexible typically,
Right.
but it's a good point that we can definitely make
Yeah.
the ask. I just wouldn't want us to set all of our hopes in that basket.
Yeah,
alone.
no, I know,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know. And then I guess through the capacity to still meet their standards in terms of being thoroughfare, but make it more attractive in terms of sidewalks or having, the center. I can't remember how you worded it, but the center island, maybe sort of more greenery or.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of those things that don't actually change the physical infrastructure, but other than building
Yeah.
sidewalks on the side.
Yeah.
But yes, the sort of the beautification piece or
Yeah.
trying to have the built environment slow people down because they are interested in it. Those are the kinds of things that definitely do fall under our
Yeah.
authority. So
That's-
Is there, what's the province willing to do to, actually enforce the speed limits on it?
I don't think that's really going to be, a much merit to ourselves or honestly to the audience. I'm not trying to pick on it. We have nothing to do with it.
Well, municipality law,
They do, yeah, they do.
what do they do? No, they won't put in a radar trap or anything.
I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know. I'm in the planning department. I wasn't part of that lobbying effort. I'm
Maybe
sorry.
I should keep that.
Just so you know, we're dealing with the police committee. I've been advocating for common rights, whether it's speed, bumps, better signage. We do think speed limits, we get dismissed generally, but it is a priority, it's a problem. And we need to get our attention. I think we have to be a little louder. Because they're not listening. It is a problem. No,
Your counselor's on it.
Well, it is, it's absolutely the problem, it's a safety problem. Where we live, of course, people access the trail and are encouraged to do so, but you take your life in your own hands every time you try to cross the highway. You can get run over.
tell me the location.
Right off King Street, we're on the upper part of King and Stanford, where people often they access the trail right there. So people fly over that hill, and I've had guys have to jam on their brakes because you're just walking across with your dogs or other people. I mean, it's just terrible. We've written many emails and many requests.
And the quantity is that.
Sorry, we have a question here. Ma'am,
I'm just curious about streetlights. Who's responsible for that?
so that is something that the municipality can order, I guess, through Nova Scotia Power.
Well, I live on highway number 3. And I come into the village every day. And that intersection there that comes into Chester, Maine.
Yeah.
There's a service station. Then there's the Commons Road or the old number 3 or whatever it was. You're going down Duke Street and then along North Street. And I mean, the traffic there in that 4-way intersection. I have no idea why there hasn't been serious accidents there. And why haven't we, as a community, thought about putting in streetlights? We have an orange caution light that is idiotic. Nobody uses it, well, occasionally. But, and the traffic, like this gentleman spoke of on North Street. I mean, if we can't slow it down with speed ramps or other signage is useless. Chester is 50 miles an hour or
Yeah.
a clock. Who is monitoring that? People, they're going faster than that up and down those streets. The motorcycles and the cars that are going at night with their big mufflers and their radios, boom, boom, boom. And I live like, well, off the main street, but in behind trees and I've been there since 1970. If we can't do anything about that, what is wrong with our policing?
You're asking some big questions.
I mean-
No, and they're valid. I just mean in the scope of what we're talking about. I think street lighting at the intersection is something we can definitely take note of.
And there should be a crosswalk or something down there at Shoreham Village and the pharmacy and OHC.
Yep.
Because that's where I live, on the left side going out. And there's elderly people coming from that senior residence.
Right.
They take their life in their hands to get across the street if they happen to want to.
Well, like I said, some of the things like the policing side are really outside of the scope, but those other comments are definitely valid and we're recording and taking notes as well.
Thank
But yeah, yes, sir.
But certainly revisiting the roundabout concept where this lady's referring to could make some sense.
Yeah, we can definitely take those comments and include that in the plan review, and then if council is willing to, like we said here, advocate to the province, that's basically.
And one other follow-up comment, if I may, on Tyler. I really do believe in front of the train station where the rail crosses, we have a serious issue which should be addressed in the nature of getting people safely across the train. If you're promoting this as a destination, the train station is a gem. You have a market there, and you have people walking and biking and ATVing across that highway. And it's a accident waiting to happen.
So that there is action on, we have an application. Want to speak to that, but we do have an application in for funding to do an overpass at that area, so that I can all over.
Yeah, it's where the old railroads.
Across the trail, but not slow down traffic.
Right, and I think that's my understanding, is the design hasn't been done yet, because we're still at the funding stage, and it would be a significant expenditure, but that is the thought, is that it would start on the train station property and go up and over, so that it wouldn't. I don't know, Chad, is it planned for pedestrian only, or?
Yeah, so that's all part of what would have to be worked out as a part of the design, what street will, what bridge put in there. So it absolutely would be an opportunity to get trail users over Highway 3, it wouldn't slow the traffic down.
And we're gonna address the big-
Without them having to physically cross.
Not addressing these other.
No.
Right.
Yeah, well, the-
I just they wanted to it'd be enough discussion.
Yeah.
This is great.
I'm gonna hear it, yeah. We were gonna ask next, I think we got a little bit there, was kind of if you were now to think of things we would like to see, let's say 10 years going forward. I know we heard a lot about the safety concerns, traffic and sidewalks. Anything else in that same kind of realm that if you were thinking of a new vision 10 years down the line, what would make it a better place in your mind or opinions? Any ideas other than the ones we mentioned in that discussion?
There's really nothing when you're driving into Chester from either way.
Right.
And I live on.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say, you're entering this nice little village
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
It's just, a couple of businesses and some houses and
Yeah.
there's nothing to really start the impact. It's like,
Right.
my God, we're driving into this village. Like,
Like a place maybe.
yeah, I know they put a couple of signs that turn right, but
Yeah.
the streets. things, we got this across the road from us, that sign.
But the weeds grow up so far.
But yeah, I noticed that.
But there's no, all I'm saying, there's no feeling that you're driving into
Okay.
something special when you come through, you're just on part of the highway. And,
So when you say that, you think like sign, like improved signage could be something, or,
again, there's not even like a Chester sign at the beginning, all decorated out, saying welcome to Chester, that thing, stuff. There's nothing, and nothing partway along to, to say, there's more to it, because I think a lot of people from out of town just drive the highways, don't realize, because they're on their way to Mahone Bay or things.
right,
But they don't realize, there's nothing to make them think that this is something special.
I hate to say it, but from my point of view, I think that's a good idea. I don't think we really want that to be Mahone Bay.
No, we don't, but I just say there's nothing to say, there's.
I mean, there are signs, but so from my perspective, I don't think that you necessarily want to encourage a huge amount of traffic to turn left on Duke Street, drive down to Pleasant, go along Pleasant, and drive back out. So I think.
Yeah,
I mean, the fact that it's a little bit anonymous doesn't bother me much.
so I end back there, no, you're good, okay. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next, topic on that?
I just
Yeah.
agree with the first fellow. I
Yeah.
always feel like when I drive into Chester, it's like until you come into this part of the village. Well, what's so special?
Right, yeah.
Just drive on through, there's no reason to stop.
So
So I
we can make it
think
feel
I
special,
expressed that,
Yeah,
I think I expressed that back in the spring, that
right,
I thought we should have something that says, hey, here in Chester.
right, okay. It's just a
People
little
stop or
bigger.
don't stop, that's up to them, but
Right,
there's nothing to really
okay,
want you to stop.
You would have to actually, I think, change some of the character of the highway.
Right.
3.
Yeah.
In that section that is quote unquote part of the village of Chester. Because otherwise, I mean, unless you put in, sort of a more of a vision, like
yeah,
all single kind of planning or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Planting or whatever, so that you have an idea that that's a part of the village.
Okay.
Is separate from just any old highway.
Understood.
I mean, I honestly, I had no idea that there had been a development plan. We
yeah.
first started coming to Chester, I guess, in 2011, but we didn't own a house, we didn't pay attention.
Right.
So I had no idea there was ever been a vision for
Yeah,
North Street,
right.
or what even it was North Street.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes, I mean, it requires much more rethinking rather than just tinkering around the edges. It requires a real vision.
Right,
If you're gonna do this.
for sure.
One of the problems is that you don't sign it. Signs are small, downtown merchants are highway, because they feel that there's nothing that sends people downtown. We operate the train station, and we do send people downtown. But we shouldn't have to. There should be something that says shops and stores down this way, or something like that.
A little more clear, yeah.
Yes, I most definitely.
Or a sidewalk from the parking lot downtown.
Yeah.
Instead of the parking lot to nowhere.
Yeah,
But I think you also need, sidewalks going up North Street. Someone's gonna get killed there. I mean, there just isn't enough room for the cars and the people. And so it's.
But in my opinion, the priority of all of this should be control of speed when you're entering. You're gonna create that and you want people to come into the village,
Yeah.
they have to slow down, because it's not just North Street you see people flying through. Like if you take you're out for a walk in the village,
Yeah.
right in the village, you'll see people flying up any one of these narrow streets going 50 kilometers an hour on a little street.
Yeah.
So, and there's nothing to stop them. There's no signage, slow down, or policing, gosh, heaven forbid, you never see a cop,
yeah.
you know.
Well,
You're
yeah,
gonna say something?
For the future, we're talking about perhaps happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Do we have any control over one-way streets, the municipality?
So not directly, but it's kind of in the same boat of these things, is advocating to the province. But we did have a traffic study done, last fall. It finished. And there were some recommendations or some potential options in there that included some one-way streets. One of them that seemed to get some traction was looking at actually making Duke one-way and Water one-way going out, so you can create kind of a loop in that sense. So those ideas, my understanding is that those are going to be coming back to council for consideration of some pilot projects. There was also a discussion about Pig Loop Road potentially either having sidewalks and or potentially being one-way. So I think all of those ideas are going to come back for further discussion at the council table, and then if council decides in favor, then it would be a matter of working with the Department of Transportation to actually implement that on their roads. Yeah.
I think Pleasant Street and Queen Street should be one way. There are a lot of large trucks that are delivering whatever to the tavern, to restaurant, water trucks delivering water. There's times they can't even get up or down the street. We're parked on both sides of the street. And I appreciate the sidewalks, I do. But I think the sidewalks have chewed up some of the street. And so it's even worse than it used to be. I mean, we have a one-way street going down around, well, Admiral Pierce, when he lived down in the water, that was made years ago. And that's very, very appropriate. There's more streets here in Chester that need one-way streets.
Yeah, so I think there's more to come on that, but we definitely, it's a good comment. I think
Thank
hopefully you'll see some action on that next
Yeah.
year or two. I would think.
Thank you.
I think that it's likely that people calling one way is remote, as laid out there.
Right.
I think there's a lot, there were 5 proposals for people. One was to bring one way into a roundabout in the middle around the San entry. I think a lot of people are not happy with that. I think the most likely thing for people is going to be sidewalk. I don't think widen in some locations and did on turn on the top.
Yes.
There are issues on people. The other thing is safer, we know that. But that's not likely. Water Street likely will become one way. And whether or not you and the others become one way, that's how we go through the public session to get input. But,
That's great.
certainly on the agenda. As far as speed is concerned, totally different issue between speed on Trunk 3, which is I think 50 at that location. Likelihood of getting down to low 50 is remote, I think. What bothers me is the 50 kilometers on within the village when they should be 20.
Yeah.
And especially down by the freedom beach, we go, oh, the kids going back and forth there. They won't put speed bumps in, and they just leave that 50.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't keep that. Someone's going to get hurt there. That's the sort of thing that we have to get the problem. We can't do anything about it.
If you drive in the golf course road, it's a beautiful sign, 35 kilometers an hour for the golf course, right?
How many, how many a
But you
year?
can drive along, 50 kilometers,
That's another issue, but I really do like to get back to Highway 3. The issues about inside the village on speed are noted. They're trying to be dealt with. But I think we need to get back to where we are for this meeting. What are we going to do with Highway 3 and the zoning?
Yeah.
If you can't put sidewalks in, then can you put trees in your sidewalk? So that you at least make it more appealing.
But there's going to be some sidewalks on North Street. That's in the works right now.
Yeah, but can you not put trees?
Street trees, yeah.
I mean, you see other places, they've got trees growing on the sidewalk.
I think our sidewalks are typically narrow, so there'd be room to do the on the side rather than right within, like what you're thinking, I think would be like on a wide, like a double sidewalk, and then you have the tree.
Yeah,
Yes,
but if you want to make it look
yes,
more or less commercial.
right,
Or more appealing,
more greenery, yeah.
more greenery, the rest would help.
Maybe I'll slow down the crowd too.
That's really important to define the area.
Yeah.
You need, there's no definition. I mean, I had no idea that it
That's
was,
good to know,
a separate zoning.
Right, yeah. this comment.
big stuff loose and put it right here.
Yeah,
I lived out there 78 years and I for free. Could be 3 lanes. You have a lot of business out there and give them a chance to turn off and keep traffic moving. And I think that solved a lot of the problems.
thank you. All right, so I think we're gonna move on to our next topic now, so we'll shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about residential development along the Highway 3 development area that we're looking at today. So where can you actually build a home or a residential structure in this Highway 3 area we're talking about today? Well, the answer is pretty much anywhere. There are 3 main zones where you can do that. So you have your highway commercial zone, and then your low density and medium density residential zones. So I hope you can kind of see this here, but just to visualize it a bit. So you have your medium residential in orange there, and then your low density residential in that kind of reddish brown. So those are your actual residential zones. And there's 3 pockets of highway commercial. So you have at the top left there, just the bottom here, then the far right. So pretty much, as you can see, that pretty much takes up most of the map. So you can build a residential structure nearly anywhere. But the question is, okay, then you build them, what can you actually build? So you can build, like there are some slight variations depending on those 3 zones, but for the most part, this slide covers exactly what you can build in the Highway 3 development area. You'll notice we have single units, 2 units in group homes. They all are allowed as of right green. So all that means is it's a more simple process. You just need to meet kind of your basic zoning requirements in your land use bylaw. You're pretty much good to go. You'll probably get your development permit. Something a bit bigger, like say the residential conversions of the 4 units or your residential developments up to 12, something like maybe a bit of a bigger apartment building. Those are through site plan, which you'll see in orange there, which is a little bit more of a strict process. So site plan, it can be differentiated from as of right, and that basically it's municipalities holding the development to a bit of a higher standard, and quite literally means that a developer have to come with a completed site plan that hits certain aspects that we ask for. So certain examples would be maybe things like you have to maintain vegetation, where your parking goes, how dense the actual development is. So there's a lot of things you have to meet. So we just thought it'd be good to make sure you know that there are different approval processes depending on the building type as it currently stands. And so one of the big things we really want to get feedback on today for the residential side is talking about multi-unit development and kind of whether or not that fits along the Highway 3 development area we're talking about. And more specifically, we're talking about probably things that are 3 units and a bit bigger than that, so maybe up to like 8 or 12. So before we kind of look at things in terms of like style and character, try to get some ideas there, I just want to kind of quickly run through a few municipal policies that kind of speak about housing, but more specifically multi-unit housing. So in the municipal planning strategy, which covers the whole municipality, not just the building, not just Highway 3, it does call on council, as you see in like policy 16, to encourage a range of housing types and densities, and that can include something like a multi-unit, so an apartment building, condo, could be a townhouse, something like that. And it also does, when possible, ask council to work with groups to encourage affordable housing options. In terms of multi-units in the village, like they're not particularly widespread. There aren't a ton of examples, but we did pull together a few just to kind of visualize what they look like and know where they are. So that top left one right there, you might notice that's actually a 3-unit building. That's actually on North Street, right in the area we're talking about today. And a couple other examples we have. It's a 10-unit building on Queen Street, so that's more in the actual village core. That's the one on the top right. And then we just took one picture. There's a lot more than just that, but there's a lot of townhouses in Chandler's Cove developments on Millennium Drive, which is another pretty successful development there. So we just kind of wanted to show you these 2 examples because these are housing types that tend to be more affordable, more dense, and they do exist currently in municipality. Because now we want to try and start thinking about, okay, well, these do exist in a small number, but could we actually maybe see these growing and being kind of located in this Highway 3 area we're talking about today? So to kind of like further that conversation, we have a pretty simple activity, but we're going to kind of go through just a series of examples of different multi-units, usually ranging from about like 3 to 10 units. A lot of these examples are actually from communities in South Shore. We've also got some kind of more modern examples too. And we just want to get your feedback, basically. Try to think about, could you actually picture this building in the Highway 3 development area we're talking about today? What do you like about them? What don't you like about them? And just try to have like an open-ended conversation about kind of building style and character, whether or not you think this could work. Yeah.
You are aware that there are rooming houses in the village, in Chester.
And I'm wondering what municipality's policy is on that, because they, ones that I'm aware of
Yeah.
are being operated feasibly.
So there are depending where they were and what the zone was that they were located in as to what the rules were, so. Maybe after the fact, we could have a chat about specific sites.
I think it's important that other people here know, because I wasn't aware until, my daughter wound up renting the whole house, and then somebody else bought it and turned it into a rooming house and turned every part of the house into bedrooms, so there were like 7 or 8 people crammed in there. No fire escapes added.
So that, you're right, that absolutely sounds like it would not be applied to the building code and fire code. Not sure about planning approval without knowing where it was located. So in some zones, boarding or rooming houses are permitted, but they're subject to regulations, and they absolutely are subject to the building code and fire code, which will deal with all the issues you just mentioned.
But it was recorded and nothing was done.
I mean, I can't speak to a specific, I did.
So it was reported to municipality, right, well, to the, by law enforcement, yeah, it's spoke to planning, and the reaction was like, oh my God, that shouldn't be happening, you leave it with us, and then nothing was done.
And there's other people that are put it on the street because they can't have a room to live in. Which is happening in Halifax, the moving houses closing. Legal or illegal.
So I can't respond to a specific complaint that I wasn't involved with.
So I'm asking about generally
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah.
Okay, I did mention something specific just to say
Yeah.
that I know that it does exist, and I know that there's more than just one specific thing.
Right.
What is the policy? Because I'm not sure that the people who live in Chester would appreciate having that kind of thing going on here if they
Right.
knew what was going
So
on.
there's not an overarching policy on rooming houses. Different zones have different regulations, and like I said, some would allow them. And the number of rooms could also be limited. So, like John just went through there is a policy that says, we want to promote a variety of housing types. And part of the thinking there is to make things that are more affordable. But again, we're here to hear from you, so we'd like to hear what are your thoughts on rooming houses and policies around them, particularly in the Highland area, but anywhere in the village relevant to this conversation. But there's not one over, if you're looking for something that says the municipality thinks rooming houses are great in all situations, that doesn't exist, it's not there. We don't have a policy that specifically speaks to them, but in some zones that are more permissive in the different types of housing options that they allow, and in particular, the number of units. So like a single unit residential zone is going to be very unlikely to allow boarding or rooming houses, because part of the intent of that single unit residential zone is to maintain that particular character of development form. But if you had a zone that allowed a 4-unit apartment building, it might be more reasonable to allow a rooming house up to a certain number of rooms in that zone. I'd say that's the way it's looked at now. It's looked at it as a different type of housing, similar to multi-unit housing. Yeah. So, but we'd love to hear. Yeah.
I don't know how we can move forward with this process, addressing the fact that MODC has already shut down the fact that they are going to bring water into the village. So how can we have all these multi-unit developments without any water?
It's a good question. Yeah, and we knew that was gonna come up. It comes up every time. It's there has been a recent call at council to revisit the issue of water. I think what's happening with that, but that hasn't been easy.
Maybe they make it every year.
Yeah, so as the planner for the municipality of Chester, I'm plowing ahead. That's quite frankly the answer. A couple of answers to that question. Through process, so if we do everything by development agreement, we can require extremely detailed aquifer water studies before we approve anything. That's going to go against that policy on housing. So I think there's a balance to be had here. That's why we're looking at it's in part why we're talking about a smaller number of bulk units. It's also in part why we're talking about a Highway 3 as opposed to some other parts of the village we're taking traditionally. Not saying there's great water everywhere, but I think anecdotally, and feel free to correct me, that the situation may be somewhat better in the Highway 3 area than it is in other pockets of the village. So so I think what we're trying to do is find a number of units that feels reasonable. Unless we're gonna shut down development entirely, something is gonna be permitted. So I don't have a good answer for you, but what I have is direction and policy from council to improve and increase housing stock. And also no water. So this is what she gets. It's so different. No, and you got a counselor in the room who's hearing it, and I've heard it too. So so I guess what I would say is, if you don't feel that any multi-unit should happen, like, tell us, no development or no new dwelling units in this zone, in this area.
I know it's great if it happened, but it needs water to happen. Otherwise, you're gonna have a bunch of empty buildings sitting there without water in them.
Okay, so we got that. No lockdown development, not lock down new residential, commercial, everything. I'm not trying to be defensive, but I do want to know.
It's great, but it can't happen without water.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
And I think that needs to be enforced, we're talking about enforcement. If there's no enforcement of anything, then all this is for nothing. Yeah, well, nobody's saying you can't do this and can't do that, but it's done within the guidelines that we all think are fine and dandy. But it seems like from talking, from hearing from people, there is no enforcement. They call in and it's crickets.
I mean, from being on the other side of that, what I can say is that was definitely looked into, and if there was no action, there likely was not a violation. And it also is possible that there was a resolution that the public is not aware of.
Well, that's why I was here in the spring and we came back from Florida. And I asked about this new little motel down the road in the water.
Yep.
I was told, I think it was good, it told me, that's not our concern, that's up to the people that have bought the property.
And the reason for that,
We don't do a flow, there's no flow.
perfect, I'm glad you brought that up, because the reason for that is because it's written into the plan as being allowed, back a slide, 2 slides. 3 slides, as of right, it's allowed as of right. So in the plan that's been in place for 30 years, hotels with no limit on the number of rooms have been allowed as of right, and that means they have some yard setbacks, they need a height setback, they get the permit. So that was what I meant by that. If we want to change that, this is the time to do that. This is when we change it and we say no new development or anything above a certain, so it requires a water set, those are the kind of things we can write in to the plan going forward.
Can I ask the question, what are height restrictions on developments? Because the concern that I have, especially if you start getting into multi-unit. Is that there is the potential for, especially if it's something like Route 3 or Haddon Hill, to wind up looking like the 102. Halifax with a bunch of skyscrapers on the skyline with, people selling expensive apartments with sea views.
Generally, the height limit as it stands today, and that is one thing that is fairly consistent within the village, in almost all zones, it's 11 meters, which is about 33 feet, which is, what I've been told from architects is you can't design a proper 3-story building at 33 feet. So it's basically 2.5, as much as you can get. Again, open to, potentially tweaking or changing that, but that is definitely some of our thinking as well, which is that those high rises would not fit in. I know Nancy first, but then we'll come over to Karen.
Thanks, Scott. Getting back to multi-unit buildings, are we talking self-contained units with their kitchen in it? Or are we talking boarding houses, rooming houses?
In theory, it could be both, but when I say multi-unit dwelling, I mean an apartment, an enclosed living space, that was gonna have a kitchen, washroom, and either an outside entrance or an entrance inside into a common hallway or common area.
Great.
Yeah.
So what kind of multi-unit buildings are we looking to see in the Highway 3 area?
Yeah, so they're probably just that.
Oh,
There. So these were, I know they're small.
Yes.
But these were a couple of the examples
Yes.
of ones that
So
we.
let's continue on
Yeah.
with the discussion.
Okay. There were 2 other hands here, so yeah.
Yes, is there any consideration being given to including actually affordable housing?
So that I think it's definitely on the table, yes. So that would be again, something we currently in the planning documents, which again are 2004, don't have a defined definition for what affordable housing is or what an affordable unit is. There is a fairly widely accepted standard for that, which is usually 30% of your gross income before tax. And so we could certainly look to adopt something like that. And then there are options if there was the desire to write in policies along the lines that, new multi-unit apartment buildings must include a percentage or a number of units that are meeting that affordable definition.
And truly affordable, meaning that anybody who works in the service industries and, we've got a lot of people working in the village and the grocery stores and the small shops and that with cafes and different things like that.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be looked at, okay, what is their income? And what can they afford? Not that, okay, the other rents are going to be 4,000 and this one will only be 3,000.
Right, yeah, it's a fair point. Again, it gets complicated because we don't directly control the rents. That's the landlords that do that, obviously. So unless we were talking about, government owned housing, then we would actually be able to say, but there are ways that we can require those units to be rented at an affordable rate, and that does include that calculation of 30%.
Before I just ask one more along the same lines, but in terms of defining affordable housing, would it be possible for the municipality to work to come up with a definition of what is actual affordable housing and require that if any developer follow that definition?
I think so. I think how we came up with that definition would take some thought, but it's doable. So I think that's definitely within the realm of possibility. I'll take note with everything else here. Yeah.
Okay, well, we want to quickly run through some of these ideas of potential kind of building types and sizes. Yeah, we'll quickly go through them and just let us know. So something like this, it's in Mahone Bay, it's a 4 units. Is that something, a style and a size you think would be appropriate somewhere along Highway 3? Just thinking about strictly style and character right now. Any feedback at all?
Yeah.
Good.
Yes, I would support that as well. In the context of Mahone Bay in particular, you're already seeing now those multi-story buildings pop up there, and it would be a sin to see that happen along the River 3 corridor.
But something this height looks a bit
Well,
better.
and already in Mahone Bay and in Bridgewater, you're seeing this increase in height of building, and it's not to my liking anyway.
Yeah.
Is there, excuse me,
Yeah, no
sorry, is there a guide, when you talked about the 33 foot height, is there a guideline for the percentage that you can fill of your lot or your footprint?
In a couple of zones there are. In the area we're talking about today, there aren't currently. So that can definitely be something we could look at. Yeah. In one of the zones that's the residential zones here in the village, it's based on how large the lot is. So there's sort of a sliding scale. So if your lot is 2,000 square feet, you can build up to, so we could certainly look at that.
But this, the 3 corridor.
Right now, it does not. So if that's something you would agree in favor of, then definitely does. And along with that, we can also have requirements that a percentage of
Setback
the
and things like that.
yes, setback, and also so we could have, say, a maximum lot coverage of say 35%, and we could also say that 25% of the land has to be either landscaped or left as natural vegetation. So you can kind of combine some of those regulations to create some of the things we've been talking about in that more greenery and finding that.
Can you explain what your septic fuel situation would be like that if you have a multiple?
Yeah, so I mean, if it was in an area, it would certainly be able to connect to our central system here, but if it was in a
It's my boobs.
yes, actually, there was a study done last year, the wastewater study, that looked at the village system as well as all the other smaller systems that we operate, and it actually found that with a fairly minor amount of upgrade work, that the village system should have capacity for another approximately 500 units. And so I believe the funding proposal, again, funding request has been made to secure that funding to keep that work. So we're working under the, unlike the water, right, a great answer. We're living under the understanding that we will, or we basically do have another 500 units of capacity. But if it was a site that either due to capacity or because it was in an area that wasn't served by the sewer system. All of any septic system that's not a central sewer system, it's approved by the Department of Environment, the provincial department, and so we would rely on them. So presumably it would be an on-site system like you have for a single unit house, but it would be at a larger scale and larger size, potentially larger piping to accommodate for. And my understanding, I'm not an expert on this, is through the building code, is that septic systems are designed even for a single unit house based on the number of bedrooms, and they estimate that based on the number of users, water users. And so I suspect there'd be a similar calculation, whether it was 1 unit or whether it was 3 units, they'd say, well, there's 12 bedrooms, so that means this is the size system that's needed.
That whole zone now is serviced by central sewer.
Yes, yeah, currently, that's, yeah, there's that. Yeah, so.
Great question. Just maybe skip to something a bit different this time. So what do you think about something like this? Definitely not.
And is it the height or the
Height or the style of? Pretty easy to know, yeah. That's what
I do like the greenery.
okay. That's good to know. Yeah, it's good to know. So style and height are both.
That's a 4-story building.
Okay, what about this? We got Bridgewater, it's an 8 units, a bit bigger than that first one we looked at, but a little bit more similar character and style. Something like that, could you imagine how it really anymore?
Don't like the color.
No, yeah, that's fair, I agree with that. But,
Personally, these look like revamped houses. to
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
And I live right across, like right behind
Right.
number 3, so I assume that empty lot right across from me is where this sort of thing would go. So I would like to see some greenery, I would like to see, I don't mind the Chandler development
right,
type of thing, I don't even mind a little more modern
yeah,
atmosphere, but I don't want them to take a house and revamp it and
Yeah.
have little jetters all over.
okay,
My opinion is that the Mahone Bay example is better than the Mill Green.
this one?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, good to know, okay.
back as well.
Yeah, oh, for sure, yeah. That's good to know. Let's see if we got one more here, this is a bit of a more, but maybe kind of what you're thinking in terms of more modern, but no.
Well, maybe not that one.
No, but the townhouse style, yeah,
But you're not gonna be able to turn off number 3. What are the people gonna do? I mean, right now, I take my life in my hands, turning right onto King Street, coming down that hill. So you're gonna have to do something with that road if you're gonna build something like that.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point.
Yeah.
That corner is.
Well,
Yeah, that's too close to the road for.
yeah, just thinking more about the style and the height, not necessarily the,
Well, height's hard to check, so it's 2 stories.
right,
Yeah, texture doesn't suit the village.
It does.
okay. This one's a little bit more forest.
Yeah.
Yeah, understood, yeah.
something like that with the historical.
Right.
site.
What do you think about the one that is in Chester right now on Highway 3?
Well, that just happened over time.
Right.
Yeah, you're where that.
But in terms of style, do you like it kind of broken up a bit and, you know,
Oh,
it's not
right.
looking like it's just a square apartment building, or
No,
just,
Yeah, that needs.
would you prefer that as basically what we're trying to get? No, okay.
No,
but nobody's gonna build a new build like that.
Unless we had regulations that forced it to it, you're right, yeah, that's a fair point. A lot of, and there is, and I think we've heard a little, actually, a comment maybe not in favor of it. We do have under the current regulations, some provisions that are what we call residential conversions, and that is literally taking an older home and dividing it up into a number of units. And so there was one comment here that, you know, basically saying that was not, that you'd rather have something, you know, purpose built as a multi-unit rather than a conversion. So that's an interesting comment too. That we have.
does the person who would be building have any say in the matter at all, or just all these people sitting around here saying what they should or shouldn't do?
Well, it
You
depends.
drive alone.
Yeah, well, and no, but your point is valid. There's a balance between wanting to encourage development and new development and good development, which comes with some regulations, but not being so over regulatory that either we don't get any, or what we do get is so expensive that it's not affordable.
And they said how much tax you would get, the more tax you would get, like, more, maybe more allowed to build what they want.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I can say, you know, thankfully here in municipality of Chester, we are in a great place financially. We have an excellent tax base already. So I mean, I know speaking at the council table many times, that's often not the first consideration. People often think that it is, but it is often more. And I think we benefit from having a strong tax base and a good fiscal history here. But absolutely, and this is why this stuff is challenging, because we're trying to find a balance between not opening the doors wide open to create a whole bunch of development people aren't going to be happy with, but also trying to meet those goals of where feasible and where it makes sense to increase the number of housing that's gradually, I think is what I would say.
For what it's worth, I think Chandler's Cove was an excellent development.
I agree.
If you'd been here when they started.
But it's matured nice.
To what degree can you really control the style of the house over and above the number of units or height?
We can get very detailed if I say we as a community of council chooses to. But I think in most cases, it doesn't make sense to go to that level of detail. There has to be a really good case built for it. The study that was done on sort of the core of the village here was, even that was looking at some more of those items, but not, what we're not looking to do is say, these are the 4 kinds of houses you can build in Chester, and it comes down to the cornice boards and that kind of level of detail. We're trying to find some regulations that strike a balance. So as an example, one item that we're considering for the village here is that structures over 1,500 square feet in footprint on the ground have to be broken up into what we call buried massing. So it basically means you have to have multiple roof peaks or porches or other, so that you basically don't just build a huge box. But what we're not saying is you have to build exactly this kind of house. So that's where we are currently, I think. And I don't think we're looking to get to that extreme level of detail. But it is theoretically possible.
Sir, Gareth, I know you're talking about big zones, but is there any potential that you could have a certain type of building required if it faces the number 3 and an option for something else if it's not able to be seen from number 3?
Yeah, that's possible as well. Have different rules for it could even be the sides of a building that are visible from the road need to be designed to a certain standard, and those that aren't can be designed to a lesser standard. Yeah.
I just want to make one comment. Right now, the regulations, if you want to build, and we've been through this with them, it's crazy. I mean, the cost of getting the documents that you want to even apply for a building permit are somewhere in the range of $12,000-13,000 or more. And I haven't even put anything on the ground. And I'm not building a house. So it seems to me that if you want to develop any of this, you've got to make the regulations attainable for people to be able to do it. I mean, how many people have that much money to start with and they haven't bought land, they haven't done anything, and we still don't have a building permit nor anything to show for them. And I mean, if that's the case, then I'm not sure where the train station loan fits in this. Is it commercial? Is it residential?
Institutional. So it's kind of a third.
So it's a third thing. And so, I mean, you can't do anything without the mass of regulations is too much.
Right, and that what Carol's referring to is currently anything that isn't done as of right that requires that site plan approval process. The criteria that go along with that include things like an engineered stormwater management plan and a professional survey, and that's where quite quickly you get that multiple thousands of dollars in terms of the cost to apply. So that again speaks to the balance that we're looking for here. If we are going to require those things, only require, for what we truly think needs it, and if there are options to, because again, that's part of what John was saying here is in the decade or so since these rules have been in place, we've only seen about 2 site plan approvals be approved. One was OHC, and that obviously was a success. I think hard pressed to find somebody who just, that was the overall generally good development. So I think the results are good, but the question is it stifling growth and development? Because it is too costly or too onerous. We've had some businesses that chose not to do expansions because it would have required this site improvement process. They saw that as either too costly or too onerous. So yeah, so it's a valid point. Definitely part of what we're looking at. Try to get feedback on it.
Just for timing's sake. Scenario.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so I covered a lot of the good talk about commercial, so I know trying to conscious everyone's time. Maybe we'll skip into this kind of new scenario where kind of Garth and I thought through maybe how the highway 3 development area we're talking about the rezone for future land use, so some tweaks we've made, and we'll go through that, walk through it, and maybe get some feedback on that to wrap things up today. So just bear with me while I skip ahead here. So yeah, like I said, this rezoning scenario is just in consideration for a lot of the issues you may have seen maybe in the discussion paper on the board. This is what we've just as an idea come up with. We want you guys to let us know what you think about it, what you like, don't like, and whether or not the regulations maybe go too easy, too far, anything, just let us know. So as we talked about a little bit earlier, like I mentioned, there was those 3 main zones. You have the highway commercial, the low density residential, and medium density residential. So in this scenario, we want to kind of reduce the amount of zones you see right now into 2 main zones. So it'd be the highway 3, we just called it this tentatively, the highway 3 residential zone and the highway 3 commercial zone. So as a reminder, this is kind of what the zoning looks like right now. So you have a lot of different colors. We have our 3 clusters of commercial. So there, and there in red. Then our kind of residential here in orange, then those little pockets of residential in brown. And now if you kind of want to compare that to what this kind of scenario we could come up with, what we think is a possible option, it would look something like this. So it's a lot clearer, a bit simpler. So everything in yellow, that would be zoned for residential use. And then we've maintained that main kind of core area of commercial activity. So that's like where your Tims is, your Independent, all those kind of main businesses in the village. And the blue areas, are just the institutional spaces, so the ones we kind of just talked about. So you have here, that's where the school would be, that's the train station. This one up top, that's where the old Windjammer Hotel was, and we just it's anticipated that it'll become a fire hall down the road. So just for as a scenario, we thought it'd be good to just cover that in this map. So why did we go down 2 zones in this scenario? So basically, from a residential standpoint, we found that those 2 zones, medium and low density, they're pretty much the exact same thing. So we thought it makes it a lot clearer, a lot more concise, easier for everyone to understand from both like the resident standpoint as well as the developer standpoint. And another big thing is this is pretty much all based on existing land use. So if you go back, I kind of pointed out that area earlier at the top, that's where like Able Engineering is, the local MLA office. That's zoned commercially right now, but to be honest, it's mostly homes in that area. So we thought this zoning better matches actual current land uses. So that was another big reason. And then what I'll get into right now is we thought the final point there is that it separates land uses a bit better. Because in this scenario, we're thinking more along the lines of making things exclusive for the residential zone. So only homes, apartments, things like that can be built there. Then only commercial developments can actually be built in the commercial section. So, like I said, it would be exclusive and it would be more, so those are 2 the biggest points. But another thing we thought is maybe it's a bit of a departure from what currently stands is that multi-unit development, so kind of those ones we're showing you, so those ideas there, maybe something 3 to put 8 as a placeholder in blue there. We'd allow those as of right in the highway 3 development area, which means it would be a much simpler approval process. So you wouldn't have to go through that kind of detailed site plan that we talked about. There wouldn't be as many boxes you have to check. It would be as expensive from the developer's point of view. And we think that could also help to kind of increase and diversify the housing stocks. You get a few more multi-units, things that are a bit more affordable in the village, in that highway 3 area. So that's kind of the big idea behind this residential rezoning.
And I'll just jump in there real quick.
Yeah.
I mean, that 8, the reason we have that asterisk there is
Yeah.
I'm really unsure about that number.
That's
So
what we did.
other than saying we don't like multi-unit by right in that zone, if you have any feedback as we get into the discussion on this, keep in mind, we're really eager to hear what, particularly based on those pictures that we looked at in terms of what's possible with this.
But even then, the multi-unit developments would be subject to the limitations
The height limit.
The height limit.
Exactly, things you guys have mentioned, yeah.
That wouldn't change.
That's right, they would have height and yard setbacks from.
Yeah, I know, cover all those different aspects you mentioned that you liked about those ones, we try to keep as much of that in play, but just still trying to make that development process.
And there are some things, not to get too in the weeds, but there are some things right now that we call for through that site plan approval that Carol was speaking of, the really onerous things. That we could incorporate into the as of right development, so not the really expensive plans maybe, but something along the lines of a multi-unit building, like I said earlier, it has to have 20% of the lot covered in landscaping or retained vegetation. So those are, we could kind of start to package those things together, say that's possible.
No worries at all. So that would be the residential thing. So like I was kind of get at there, the main goals here would be to increase diversity housing stock. So by allowing somewhere between like, let's say 3 to 8, 3 to 6 units by right, it would allow many more affordable options. So things like the townhouses, the apartment buildings, things like that. Then also, like with that in mind, still number 2, we want to maintain a certain degree of character. So like what we're talking about, we don't want the heights to get out of hand. We want to make sure it's within those kind of images we all kind of agreed on that would fit in this area. And then finally, it's the separate land uses so to make again zoning a lot more clear, and that'll come up a bit more now when I talk about what we think would be like a commercial zone. So we only maintain that one part kind of to the east, which is where like the Tim's all the way up Quickway is in the scenario. And similar to the residential zone, it would be for commercial uses only. So you wouldn't be allowed to build homes anymore, which we mentioned earlier, you can do currently in the commercial zone. And the kind of trade-off, so yes, you do lose a bit of commercial zoning in this scenario, but the kind of trade-off we envision is that in doing so, we would again simplify the design guidelines and those site plan requirements to make, you know, business a little bit easier to kind of expand and grow within that area. And then while it's separated, you don't have to worry so much about infringing on kind of residential character, which we see happening in that yellow area we kind of showed at the start. So that's the kind of main idea in separating those 2 zones. It's a little bit different than what we have right now, but we thought it could meet some of those goals, both kind of from an economic point of view, but also for that residential development and the housing diversification.
You could also tweak it if you wanted to allow some residential in their commercial.
Of course, yeah, that's another option. Yeah, exactly. And the paper does speak to that a little bit more in depth as well. If anyone does want to check that out.
There's a question on.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see where that old home property was on.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna get into that right now. Actually,
Yeah,
if you want to, yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, the last little part before we wrap up here today, we're gonna try to like think of how this rezoning scenario, what the possible kind of real impact would be if it were to ever go forward and something like this. So if you remember this area too, that right now is zoned commercially. That's that little pocket of mostly undeveloped land that Derek just mentioned. It's where the old Cobalt industry site was. And back in 2011, when Akistics did their work, they decided that, you know, everyone agreed this would be zoned for future commercial use, but as we still stand here today, nothing's ever happened on that site. So in our scenario, this would actually now be zoned for exclusive residential use. You couldn't do business here anymore. And the reason kind of we want to pick this as a specific example is because there are, so these 5 sites on that lot, they're all undeveloped. We think based on things like their size, so some of them, like this guy here is quite large, even this one, there's sites that, you know, if all the factors did work out, they probably could support certain multi-unit developments, maybe on the smaller ones, 3 or 4 unit, but maybe somewhere here, something a bit bigger like 8. So that's how this rezoning scenario could actually potentially one day shape the build form of that highway 3 area. So is that kind of what you were looking for the Hubble site, or you had in mind?
I just want to make sure you didn't miss it.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, yeah, it's just, yeah.
I'm really concerned with that, is that.
Yeah.
sea level.
In wetlands.
Yeah, like how you, for, like, and we live right across from. the city.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you can't build, then, I mean, there's no way you can come, you know, build up high enough to access off the highway. It's
Right.
too congested.
Yeah.
So, you know, and as much as I don't want to see industrial there,
Yeah.
I just can't imagine
It'd be difficult.
to build residential when that the flood potential there is,
Yeah.
already the tide backs into part of it.
It's a good point, and
Are wetlands protected? I mean,
it's, so the stream, but the actual land is not on the, at least on the mapping that we refer to, it's not identified as a designated wetland. But the stream, like the water course itself is, and there are some buffering and setback requirements for that. Related to the coastal sea level rise and that kind of thing. I would say a couple of things. One is that us making this change obviously doesn't create any buildings, it just creates the potential. there, of course, with everything, there's an element of, personal responsibility and for the person who's putting all the money into it to make sure that that's not. And the third piece, which, because none of those first two are not probably satisfactory, the third piece is that right now we do not have any setbacks from the coast. It's been a discussion at the council table. We do have setbacks from land water courses and water bodies. And the reason that council has opted not to do that yet is because there is, you may have heard about the Coastal Protection Act. It's a big piece of provincial legislation on this. It's been coming and it is coming, and we hope it's sooner rather than later. But that is, as soon as that takes effect, if I understand this, the act has been passed. It's the regulations that are being worked on, and a date, but I would expect it this year, if not early next year. And when that comes in, that is going to have a really, from my mind, and what I think a really good, rigorous approval process for development on within it. And it's basically, it's a very complex analysis. It's based on how far you are to the coast horizontally, but also vertically. And there's a calculation and an on-site assessment done by either an engineer or a surveyor. And they run, there's a toolkit that they tally up, and then it says for this particular site, this is how far back you have to be and how high above sea level you have to be. So I guess what I would say is, because we're talking about future development here, it's in all likelihood that will be subject to those regulations as well. And that should either prevent it or require that they build up.
You take a set of lights there, because right now, it's hard enough to get out of Victoria Street.
Yeah, and that's another reason why, and you're right, I mean, with multi-unit development, you get traffic generation as well. With commercial development, you need more traffic generation. So it's definitely, you're right, it's definitely a point for consideration. And as was mentioned earlier, the existing entrance is on Victoria Street. So it's very unlikely that anything would get approved up there. When development was taking place here, there is, it's again, Department of Transportation, who owns all the roads. They would be the ones to issue driveway permits. So they would be the ones to determine if it was a safe access point. But yeah, no, I think I understand it. It's challenging. Yeah. And so that's, again, I'll just kind of say that, we don't want to set up zoning for a lot that we know is undeveloped. But if we rezone something, it also doesn't mean we're saying every box is checked right now and all the problems are solved. Some of it is up to the owner's level.
Did I understand you to say that on one of the back slides, that from Tim Hortons, so to the Kiwi or Kiwi, is going to be all commercial?
Yeah, that's what it is today. To the quick way, not Kiwi.
Or
Yeah, that's what I mean. We're not coming down. Yeah.
quick way, yeah.
Yes, yeah, so basically, this should be the independent here. And that's the intersection with Duke Street. So yeah, that area that's red right now, that is what's currently in place with the commercial zone.
But residents are allowed.
Right now, residents are allowed, and there are some existing homes.
And what happens when people own a private dwelling, living dwelling?
Yeah.
When it's time to sell?
Oh, right, okay, so that's a good point. So in any of these cases, be it a residential use in the commercial zone or say able engineering in the proposed residential zone. This does not stop you from using the property in the way you're using it currently. It would, in the case of a sale, if a house was sold, it could be continue to be used as a house. Technically, what happens is it becomes what's called a non-conforming use. And that is in our bylaw, there's a section that speaks to those. And basically what it means is it's allowed to be continued to be used as it was. And there really are, it would only be if the use was going to be changed to something else, then whatever it was changing to would have to comply with the use of it. So it particularly in the case of a residence, it protects you for basically perpetuity.
What would it do to their property values? Not that I live there, I live in the other one, but I would be thinking that I wouldn't want to be in that area if it's all.
Yeah, I mean, they already are there to that extent. So I mean, you could see it a couple ways. I'm not, an market economist, but it could increase the value of the residential properties because all of a sudden they're commercial, or I guess it could potentially reduce them because it's more limited to what could happen. It's a good question. We don't, it's not to say we don't care about that. It's generally not something we're.
The only thing that's changing here is the distance between clean and king. Or like the grass.
Yeah, basically, right now, there's a cluster up here and there's a cluster in this area that we would be proposing to.
Right,
flip.
but you're all in terms of the people.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So that's commercial right now, and that's commercial right now, and then it would become residential in this scenario. Yeah.
So in the home property that you were talking about, so right now, that's commercial. Cannot be residential, right? But that's what you're trying to change that area to be.
Yeah, that area as well as, like I said, up by the windjammer.
If people live adjacent to that home area, and in one of the small lots, you said it was 3.
Yeah.
Then if that's surface water and on-surface water.
Right, back to the water question, yeah, and
That's a lot, if you're talking one of the small lots.
Right.
You put in 3 units.
right,
And then there was at least 3 of those, and then. there was
Back to that. So
yeah,
that's what you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
So if the small one is 3 units, then. That means there'd be 2 3 units and maybe 1 would be 4 or 5 units, 1 possibly 6 units and more.
right. So, yeah, so there's, and again, I do understand the water concern.
Well,
So-
that's gonna be more highly.
Yeah. So a couple of things, there, and it's tricky without having a good scientific study to build off of, but it is definitely possible and in many cases common to include a maximum density. And that usually is a basis per acre or per hectare basis. So that would definitely be something we could do. Now, in an ideal world, we would know exactly what the groundwater situation was there, and then we would tie that number to whatever was appropriate. So it would be a little bit arbitrary, but I think we could dig into that and look at some tabletop studies and see if we could come up with X number of units per acre.
But as of right now, you wouldn't be able to do that because it's not the term used as of site or.
As of right, yeah, so actually, right now, in the commercial zone, there is some ability to develop residential uses. In this scenario, we would be removing that, so we'd be saying in the commercial, it's only commercial.
So then when you change it residential, then it wouldn't be any developer complaint would be.
Possibly, although even that's up for debate, or the number of units as of right is up for debate. So like we said, that 3 to 8, if that was, maybe it's only 2, maybe 4 and above, it's a site plan approval or a higher level of approval. So I know it's a lot, but those are all things that we're interested in giving feedback on. But yes, as of today, there is the ability to build a residential use in that highway commercial zone. And part of the reason that we're, I guess, asking and thinking about changing that to no longer allow it is, well, I guess it's twofold. It's one, that if this scenario was implemented, the total number of areas that could do commercial are going to be reduced, if we're going to get rid of those 2 clusters. But also, there have been some issues discussed and changes over the last number of years. And there's been a bit of conflict between what the business community is looking for in that area and what we hear. I won't say the residents in that area specifically, but just what we hear generally from the residential community. The one that comes to mind around illuminated signage. I'm not sure if anybody was aware, but we did have an amendment in the last year or 2 permanent illuminated signage in that highway commercial zone. And so one of the reasons potentially to look at no more residential uses is to say, if we're going to allow those kinds of things, those have a higher chance to cause a conflict with a residential use that's in close proximity. And so it's not the only way to look at it, but it's one way of looking at it to say if illuminated signage is allowed here, we don't want to allow the residential uses to create or potential to create more conflict. And so it's sort of a give and take, I guess, in terms of business. The commercial zone is being shrunk, but maybe a little bit more flexible within the zone, and meanwhile the residential zone is being expanded. At least that's how we were looking at it when we came up with this concept. Yeah.
We talked a bit about residential and commercial, I forget which option, but one of them talks about home-based businesses allowed in residential.
Yes.
Could you just say a few words about? So when I think about 2011 study that said we want a destination, and we want to maintain the look and feel of Chester, I think about jewelry stores and craft shops. And so is home-based business that, or is it I can run a little accounting thing out of my basement as long as I don't have a park?
Yeah,
What does that mean?
it's, so, yeah, so even under this scenario, we would still, propose that home-based business would be allowed in the residential zone. Exactly where it falls on that scale that you described is again up for discussion and can work differently in different zones. For example, in most of our zones, a home-based business is things like, certainly a home office that you described, that absolutely, but also things like a craft workshop, basically retail if you're producing the product on site, or assembling the product on site. And so there's a little bit more flexibility in those zones, but then in our single unit zone, it is a little bit more locked down. So it's basically anything that does not involve people coming to the property. So in the highway commercial or in the highway 3 area, we could go with one of those or the other, or somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Yeah, so I think we are pretty much out of time, but we're happy to stay if you folks.
It's just, I mean, it's all great, the idea of only 2 zones, and
Yeah.
you're gonna increase the residential density in that highway 3 area. Which of course is great if you're gonna control the development and what's developed there. It comes back, however, to the issue that was brought up about safety and speed on highway 3 and the community establishing a you are in Chester type of feel. But it's almost like you guys have one hand tied behind your back, and it's provincial jurisdiction. You're gonna try to implement something which you ultimately can't even control because the province is in control of it. So it's gonna be interesting to see how you deal with that. To be honest with you, I mean, yeah, and I hope you come up with it, because that is still a major issue for people, and it's gonna become worse if you develop it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to find a way to deal with the province to try to get that addressed somehow, but if not, you're gonna just create a bigger problem.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it absolutely is a complication and a frustration at times of the job, but I don't disagree, and I think certainly we have Councillor Wells here, and he's already said that there are some aspects that council is going to push, and I think particularly as we have today, if we hear a resounding, these are the focus points to put pressure on, I think we'll do our best and pass them up the line to apply as much pressure as we can.
And regarding the site plans, in light of the constraints from water and from the traffic block. Which you don't count. You might want to use your scenario too, then it's as a right to 1 to 3.
Yes, that would be,
You have time to cover.
Yeah.
right, yeah, and that would be a way to avoid having to do those things.
Maybe the site plan rules right now are 2 owners.
Right,
Maybe they're designed larger.
right, and maybe there's,
Not.
and that was kind of our thinking too, maybe there's a few of them that we want to keep, but not.
So they want to have 1 to 3 as the right, and about that site plan, maybe tail of the site plan to
Get a little less on this
side of the.
here.
Just one, early in the meeting, there was some questions of the sidewalk. I just want to clarify what's in the offer right now for sidewalks, and that's all. Subject to the designer saying it's possible to cause permission an issue with the sidewalk. Well, Lake C, the big group would be the first one, then Duke Street to Victoria. The proposals for sidewalks and the theme design, thought stuff people up there today, actually, the designers, it's doing some of the site work. And phase 2 is Victoria to the Shore Mall, and phase 3 is the big one. So those are the 3 areas that sidewalks are being actively designed. Some of the subject to That's my issue. So that's what we're gonna do. Over the next probably 2 years.
Back here.
I wanted to reiterate the importance of ongoing dialogue in the town and the office. Very, very important. And I don't know, North Street does not even have a sign. I didn't even know it's.
No, you're right. As we were putting together these maps, we were noticing that too. It's on Google Maps. It's labeled as North Street for that section, but you're right. You never know it. To some of the other comments around here, around even being in the field, you never know you were on North Street. Yes.
Can I ask a question? Looking at your map.
Yeah.
The new idea. So Chester as a destination. Does it start when you say people are coming south, does it start when you get the commercial? Or are you considering, are you going to focus more on the part that you have that corner where you get sort of Duke and street? I mean, and then you sweep in the residential section. I mean, if you have limited resources, I mean, this is something, if you're going to zone it where you actually are not cleaning up into lots of pieces anymore, it makes sense to think about where your destination starts.
Right.
Does it start when you enter the commercial section, or does it start when you sort of hit that corner where?
I mean, the welcome Chester sign is outside.
Outside.
Yeah,
Right.
it depends on your perspective.
Yeah,
I mean, if you can think about how you're.
Yeah.
Maybe going to rethink where to put sidewalks and planting and things like that, and it's sort of if you have part of it, you start with sidewalks, but also considering where does the destination start?
Yeah.
The other comment I would make is that I think that the concept of by right may need to include what are you gonna do about water?
Yep.
Because that's the one thing that everybody knows is in short supply. Right. And the idea that so the 30-room hotel in Chester by right without worrying about water. Kind of surprised. You know, I don't think that it's unlikely that we're going to get water because we have a lot of homes. That's not. Not what work that way.
But there are other ways of solving water too. I mean, I don't have a system, but I know some houses. do.
Oh, I agree.
That
But
sort of thing. So all of that would be part of whatever they.
Yeah. but I think it would be nice to know, even on the far right, that if they're gonna use a cistern, that they've actually got plans to put one in.
Yeah. And how many, if there are 500 units for the extension of the sewage system, how much would say the hotel take?
I think the calculation would be 30, like it would be based on the number of rooms. There's a slightly different one, I think, for accommodations. But it would be, I say it's no more than 40. I think they're counted at a 1 room per unit.
Right. So it would take,
It would take a chunk. Yeah.
take chunk.
And that is how the capacity works generally. Now, if we got to the point that the existing system was at capacity or nearing capacity again, there is always the possibility that council, because of this guy, future expansion.
Right.
And to the point on the water in the as of right, I think that's definitely something we can look at. Again, the tricky part is, are we gonna do that for a single unit home or where do we draw the line?
I think you have, I think you pretty much have.
And then it increases the cost because what we're, well, I guess putting this question out there because this is what I'll have to think through is the test. So currently in, not in as of right, but in the site plan and in the development agreement, the higher level approval processes, it's required to submit information to show, and this is the way it's worded, that there's adequate potable water on site, and this is the key part, to serve the development. And that's what my experience, you folks never want to hear, because you want to hear that it's not your existing rights. And my understanding is that, and I'm not saying it's possible, but the level of study required to prove that becomes very costly. And that's where we're just in this, I want to say catch-22, but it's just such a tough situation to figure out what the
If
right.
you don't develop at a detriment to people that have lived here.
Absolutely. But we also want to grow, and that's what I'm stuck with. Yeah, no, I They do conflict. I
That's it, I mean, about 2 blocks there, really, you're talking about the hotels and then that development. And literally that is less than 2 city blocks.
Right, yeah.
What they're looking at, they're probably putting 100
So
possible.
yeah, absolutely. So I think we're definitely hearing water is obviously a concern and basically what we were thinking is that you get into that multi-unit discussion, it very quickly becomes, we need to know that the water is not going to be an issue. So that's good feedback. And I can completely understand it. I'm sure I would be the same if it were in an area that my property were. You folks, I believe, would want to operate on the precautionary principle, right? You're there, you're hopefully happy with where you live, and with your properties, and so change is potentially a threat, and I understand that, and I think that's a fair.
But I just want to know that you have that in mind, not just developments, that you understand our worries and our fears and want to make them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I do. I think that's a good. It's a good thing to keep reminding us, and we definitely do have that in mind. But, and it's, I know I keep saying this, but it's where there's conflicting priorities and trying to find a way forward. Yes, if we had a water system, it would make a lot of this easier. We'd still be having a lot of discussions around
But if these are individual apartments and people live in, they're gonna understand the problem. With a hotel, these are people that are on vacation. And when I go to the city, do I shut off my water when I brush my teeth? Probably not. But I certainly make sure everybody does it when I go to my house.
Yeah, understood. And I think, I know it's too late, but I think even without, these kind of meetings, I think the reaction has shown us that level of commercial development with as of right is not appropriate.
As of right, I get it, but as of right, it should be up to the government to say it might be as of right, but it's not greater permission.
Right, yes, yeah. So I think definitely something of that scale, not even close to that scale going forward. I would be looking either for a site plan approval with details on water or a development agreement, which also would include those things. And the development agreement, which we didn't really touch a whole lot on tonight, is definitely a more arduous process. It involves much more public involvement, early meetings in the process, and it allows council. It allows the developer more flexibility when it's a negotiation with council, and so council can also ask for additional items too. And so it is definitely more costly, but I think for high level things like hotels or very large multi-units, be that 6+, 4+, whatever it is, I think it's still there. I think what we're hearing tonight is there's still a case to put those through the higher level of scrutiny. And
So, I think you said something to the effect at the beginning of you've been charged to increase amount and type or variation of housing in your role there. So I'm just curious in general about beyond the zoning. Are there other things that council is thinking about to increase interest? Because I also heard somebody say, well, since 2011, there really hasn't been much change in this zone. So are there other things underway that would cause developers to think, oh, Chester's a great place to come and build a 4-unit apartment building, or for someone who owns a home to think, yes, I can put an in-law suite in my basement, or whatever the case might be?
I would say there are a number of things mostly in progress, not so much that's been done. We're getting there. The first thing that I would say is we have a really excellent economic development team. We have two folks, Aaron and Olivia, who's here with us tonight. And that is part of their role is to attract both people and businesses to the municipality. I know I've been working lately with Aaron on some discussions around the exit 6 area, because there's been some thoughts that growth is coming with the twin of the highway, and we should be preparing for that. So definitely those folks are doing that all the time. Outside of that, I know council, like you said, has made affordability and housing one of their priority topics, and there is some work still at the staff level that will be coming to council on affordability and housing. We've actually just recently, I was going to say, we're trying to keep John on for a school project to do a piece on housing in the municipality. Affordability will be a key piece of that. So it's on the radar and it's in the works. And we see this as, like I said, changing the zoning isn't going to build anything. It's only going to potentially open doors to that, so it absolutely is a multifaceted type of endeavor. Yep. Great, well, thank you all very much. This has been a really excellent discussion. We appreciate you staying a little bit over time, and we're gonna do it again in a couple hours. I certainly hope the crowd that comes tonight is as eager to talk, so really, truly,
Thank you
thank
very
you all.